Why your risk matrix is lying to you, and how ISO/IEC 27005 helps you manage risk for real. Pushpin disclaimer. This article is written for people without deep technical background in information security risk management. If you're an expert in ISO/IEC 27001 or 27005, you'll find some concepts intentionally simplified for accessibility. Introduction. Think back to the last time you saw a risk matrix in a meeting. It was probably a colorful 5x5 grid with green, yellow, and red cells. It looked organized, professional, and gave the impression that someone really knew what they were doing. But here's the uncomfortable question: do those colors reflect solid technical decisions, or do they just make everything look good on the slide? The truth is, most cybersecurity risk matrices end up being more art than analysis. They're filled out in a quick workshop, produce a pretty heat map for the committee, get filed away until the next audit, and nobody can actually explain why two risks with the same red color should be treated the same way. Here's the real problem: matrices convert complex, uncertain information into an apparently precise score by magic. It's as if multiplying probability times impact were an actual mathematical formula, when you're really combining two scales that can't even be consistently added together. This affects you more than you think. When your organization makes security decisions based on colors instead of real evidence, you end up investing in controls that don't reduce risk, ignoring everyday threats because they're yellow, and getting surprised when an incident you never saw coming was actually there all along. In this article you'll learn why traditional risk matrices mislead more than they help. How ISO/IEC 27005 guides you toward a structured risk management process. What to do to make your security decisions defensible, even to auditors. Why is this relevant now? Cybersecurity regulations are getting tougher: GDPR, NIS2, sector frameworks, attacks are more sophisticated, and audits are looking beyond "do you have a matrix?" to ask, "can you prove your controls actually reduce risk?" If you keep using the matrix as if it were the answer, you're building on sand. But if you use it for what it really is, a communication tool, not a decision-making tool, you can turn your risk management into something that actually protects your organization. What is ISO/IEC 27005 and why should you know about it? ISO/IEC 27005 is an international standard that guides you to manage information security risks in a structured way. It's not a certification standard, that's ISO/IEC 27001, but rather a practical guide that helps you implement the risk management process within your Information Security Management System, ISMS. Think of ISO/IEC 27005 as the instruction manual for assembling complex furniture. ISO/IEC 27001 tells you need a working security system, but doesn't explain step-by-step how to build it. That's where 27005 comes in. It gives you the method, the conceptual tools, and best practices to identify, assess, and treat risks in a way that withstands an audit and, more importantly, actually protects your information. What's it for exactly? ISO/IEC 27005 exists to prevent risk management from becoming a check-the-box exercise. Its purpose is to help you identify what can go wrong, threats, vulnerabilities, critical assets. Assess how serious it'd be and how likely it is to happen. Decide what to do about it: reduce, accept, transfer, avoid. Monitor that your controls actually work. All of this connects with ISO/IEC 27001, ISMS requirements, and ISO 31000, the general risk management framework used across the organization, not just in technology. The 5x5 matrix trap. Here's the critical point: many organizations believe doing risk management means having a pretty matrix. But ISO/IEC 27005 never tells you, use a 5x5 matrix and multiply probability by impact. What it does tell you is, you need a structured process, clear criteria, evidence, and traceability. The matrix can exist as a visualization tool to explain to the executive committee where the problems are. But if it's the only thing you have, you're in trouble. How ISO/IEC 27005 fits in the security ecosystem. To understand why ISO/IEC 27005 matters, you need to see the big picture. There are three key pieces working together. ISO/IEC 27001, the system requirements. This is the certifiable standard. It defines what your organization must have to demonstrate that it manages information security systematically. Think of it as the rules of the game. You need policies, controls, accountable people, audits, continuous improvement. A fundamental part of ISO/IEC 27001 is risk management. You can't get certified if you don't demonstrate that you identify, assess, and treat security risks. ISO/IEC 27005, the guide for how to do risk management. Here's the detail of how to execute that process. It tells you how to establish context, identify threats, assess vulnerabilities, decide on treatments, and monitor results. It's like the difference between, you must cook healthy food, 27001, and, here's the step-by-step recipe to do it right, 27005. ISO 31000, the Corporate Risk Management Framework. This standard is generic, not specific to technology or security. It gives you the principles and complete cycle: identify, analyze, evaluate, treat, monitor, and communicate risks. Why does this matter? Because many companies treat cyber risk as an island separate from the rest of the organization. ISO 31000 reminds you that risk is cross-cutting. A security risk can affect operations, compliance, reputation, and finances. How the three connect. Imagine ISO 31000 is the common language the entire company speaks to manage any type of risk: financial, operational, strategic. ISO/IEC 27005 translates that language into the specific context of information security, threats, vulnerabilities, technical controls. And ISO/IEC 27001 turns all that into auditable requirements. If you design your security risk method as a subset of the corporate method, you avoid problems like having a critical risk in cyber that the enterprise risk area completely ignores, or vice versa. The matrix promise. And why it's deceiving you. A typical risk matrix tries to simplify two dimensions: probability, or likelihood, how possible it is to occur; impact, or consequence, how serious it'd be. You combine both and get a classification: low, medium, high. Simple, right? The problem is, in information security, nothing's simple. Probability depends on your architecture, existing controls, adversary sophistication, external exposure, and more. Impact depends on asset type, how quickly you can recover, whether it affects confidentiality, integrity, or availability. A color matrix can hide all those dependencies. And when you hide complexity, you make bad decisions. Deception number 1, multiplying what can't be multiplied. When you say, risk equals probability times impact, with scales from 1 to 5, you're multiplying ranges, not real numbers. The jump from probability 1, rare, to 2, unlikely, isn't equivalent to the jump from 4, likely, to 5, almost certain. They're ordered categories, not measurements with uniform distance. It's like saying the difference between warm and hot is the same as between very hot and boiling. Sounds absurd, right? But with matrices we do it all the time. Practical effect *, your organization starts comparing risks as if 20 were twice as dangerous as 10, when they're really just labels. You end up prioritizing investments based on numbers that don't have real mathematical properties. Deception number 2, same color, totally different urgency. Imagine two risks that land in red. Risk A *, very likely, moderate impact, affects a secondary system you can shut down without paralyzing the business. Risk B *, unlikely, extreme impact, affects a critical regulatory process that could cost you your operating license. Both are red. But the treatment shouldn't be the same. The first needs routine preventive controls, patching, basic hardening. The second needs a contingency plan, robust compensating controls, and intensive monitoring. If you only look at the color, you prioritize wrong. Worse, many organizations kill the unlikely extreme risk with expensive, unnecessary controls while ignoring the likely moderate risk that's causing small problems every single day, like poorly managed privileged accounts that eventually become a breach. Deception number 3, arbitrary thresholds and the border effect. In a 5x5 matrix, someone decided that probability 3 times impact 3 equals medium, but 3 times 4 is equal to high. Why? Usually because a consultant drew lines on the matrix and colored them in. Minor changes in score, due to perception, business pressure, or an ambiguous criterion, can move a risk from yellow to red without anything technical actually changing. Practical effect ** you incentivize gaming. If an area knows a red risk forces immediate investment they don't have budget to cover, they adjust the definition so it stays yellow and can be postponed another quarter. Deception number 4, confusing event probability with damage probability. In cybersecurity, the event can be frequent, phishing attempts every day, but material impact depends on your defense barriers. If you've got MFA, multi-factor authentication, like having 2 different keys to open a safe, EDR, endpoint detection and response, like a security guard watching every computer 24/7, network segmentation, and tested backups, the probability that a phishing attempt turns into a serious compromise is low. But many matrices assign high probability just because attempts are frequent, without considering whether controls work. Result * you overdimension threats your architecture already mitigates, and underdimension silent risks where your controls have gaps. Deception number 5, impact reduced to a single label. Impact isn't just money. In information security, impact is measured in 3 main dimensions, known as CIA. Confidentiality * unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. Integrity * unauthorized alteration of data. Availability * disruption of services or systems. Plus, legal compliance, reputation, physical safety, operational continuity. Simplified matrices tend to unify everything into high impact, without specifying what type of damage you're measuring. And without that, you can't select appropriate controls. For example, a confidentiality loss risk needs encryption, writing messages in secret code that only the recipient can decode, and access control. An availability loss risk needs redundancy, backups, and recovery plans. If your matrix doesn't separate this, you're choosing controls blindly. Deception number 6, not capturing uncertainty. Your matrix gives you a score, 3 times 4 is equal to 12, high risk. But it doesn't tell you how confident you are in that assessment. Does that 3 in probability come from telemetry data, attack attempt analysis, sector benchmarks? Or does it come from, I think it's likely, in a 2-hour workshop? In cybersecurity there's structural uncertainty. You don't know everything you have exposed, you don't see all adversary activity, threats constantly change. Consequence * 2 risks can have the same score, but one's backed by solid evidence and the other's basically a hunch. And your matrix doesn't distinguish between them. Deception number 7, mixing operational risks with strategic ones. A single matrix usually mixes operational risks, missing patches on a specific server. Systemic risks, critical dependency on a cloud provider with no exit plan. Compliance risks, contractual audit obligation. Comparing them on the same board distorts priorities. An operational risk might be high because it's urgent to fix today. A strategic risk might be high because it determines business viability over 3 years. They shouldn't compete for the same budget or executive attention. So, does ISO/IEC 27005 prohibit matrices? No. But it does require they're not the only thing you have. ISO/IEC 27005 guides you toward a structured process. The matrix can be part of analyzing or evaluating, but doesn't replace the complete method. The real process includes context * define what you protect, under what rules, with what criteria. Identification * build traceable risk scenarios, not generic lists. Analysis * understand why it could happen and how exposed you are. Evaluation * compare against criteria and decide priority. Treatment * select controls with evidence and traceability. Acceptance * have the business assume informed decisions. Monitoring * verify controls work and risk evolves. If the matrix is your only output, you're doing classification, not management. Practical structure of a process aligned with ISO/IEC 27005. Here's what a well-built process looks like, without needing to be an expert in the standard. Step 1. Establish context, the rules of the game. Before scoring anything, you need to agree on scope * what processes, systems, locations your risk management covers. Criteria * how you define high, acceptable, tolerable residual. Assumptions * threat model, time horizon, 1 year, 3 years, risk appetite. Stakeholders * who participates, IT, cyber, legal, continuity, business. Practical example * if your organization handles health data under GDPR, your critical impact criterion might be exposure of sensitive personal data from more than 1,000 patients. Without that written criterion, each area will interpret critical their own way. Step 2. Identify risks as scenarios, not loose words. A useful risk has this form: asset/process plus threat plus vulnerability condition plus consequence. Example: unauthorized access to code repository through compromised credentials in absence of MFA, possibility of malicious code insertion, impact on product integrity and supply chain. This is much more defensible than writing risk, phishing, in an Excel cell. Step 3. Analyze risk based on evidence. Break down probability into subfactors. Exposure * is it exposed to the internet? Do third parties have access? Vulnerability * are there known technical weaknesses? Adversary capability * how sophisticated is the threat? Existing controls * what barriers do you already have? Do they work? Example * if you're evaluating ransomware, probability isn't just high because there are many attacks. It's exposure, RDP exposed without VPN, vulnerability, unpatched systems, controls, EDR with behavior detection. Offline tested backups. Step 4. Evaluate against criteria and prioritize. This is where, if you use a matrix, you do it with judgment. Don't decide only by color. Add additional dimensions. Criticality of affected process. External versus internal exposure. Speed of materialization, how fast it turns into damage. Concentration, single points of failure. Level of uncertainty in assessment. Step 5. Treat risk with traceability. Select controls that map to the scenario. Avoid * change the process to eliminate risk. Reduce * implement controls, preventive, detective, corrective. Transfer * insurance, contracts with liability clauses. Accept * with formal justification and business approval. Critical * each control must have. Clear objective, reduces probability or impact. Expected evidence, configuration, procedure, logs. Effectiveness metric, not just exists but works. This connects with the Statement of Applicability, SOA, in ISO/IEC 27001, which justifies what controls you implement and why. Step 6. Formal risk acceptance. The business must assume informed decisions. An acceptance record must include complete scenario, Assessed impact and probability. Existing controls. Residual risk. Review date. Accountable person. Triggers for reevaluation, architecture changes, incidents. Step 7. Continuous monitoring. Risk evolves. Your assessment should too. Define events that force reevaluation. Architecture or critical vendor changes. Security incident. Audit finding. Critical vulnerability exploited in your sector. Regulatory change. In cybersecurity, waiting a year to review risks is an eternity. Criteria that make the difference. The heart of a defensible method isn't the matrix, it's the criteria. Impact criteria by dimension. Confidentiality * data sensitivity, exposure scope. Integrity * modification potential, effect on critical decisions. Availability * process disruption, recovery time. Compliance * legal, contractual obligations, audits. Operations * effects on continuity, physical safety. Example of well-defined criteria. Critical, exposure of sensitive personal data greater than 10,000 records or disruption greater than 24 hours of critical regulatory process. High, exposure 1,000 to 10,000 records or disruption 8 to 24 hours. Medium, exposure less than 1,000 records or disruption 2 to 8 hours. Low, no significant exposure or disruption less than 2 hours. Decomposed probability criteria. Instead of likely/unlikely, use exposure * attack surface, external/internal/third-party/partners. Controllability * maturity of preventive and detective controls. Attractiveness * interest to attackers, value, notoriety, sector. History * internal or sector incidents, if there's evidence. Acceptance criteria. What risks can be accepted and who has authority? Under what conditions, timeframe, compensating mitigation, monitoring. When it must be escalated, if it affects critical processes or compliance. Practical alternatives without needing to be a mathematician. Not all organizations are ready for complex quantitative models. Even so, you can improve dramatically. Option A, scenarios plus qualitative severity plus confidence. Severity, low/medium/high/critical with clear definitions. Confidence, low/medium/high based on available evidence. Priority equals severity adjusted by confidence and exposure. Advantage * avoids false precision, forces documenting evidence. Option B, semi-quantitative with anchors. Probability and impact with concrete examples, anchors. Consistency rules, e.g., if there's no MFA on external privileged access, probability can't be low. Periodic calibration with incident feedback. Advantage * preserves internal ranking, reduces manipulation. Option C, bow tie or causal tree. Represents causes, preventive barriers, event mitigation barriers, consequences. Maps controls to specific scenario segments. Advantage * converts controls into barriers with technical evidence. Option D, quantitative by ranges. Frequency and loss ranges with uncertainty. Sensitivity analysis, what variables move the result. Advantage * improves prioritization by return on control investment. Practical implementation in your organization. People, who does what? Risk owner, business decides acceptance, prioritizes treatment. CISO/security lead * defines method, advises, consolidates. IT/architecture * provides technical evidence, designs controls. GRC/compliance * connects with ISMS requirements and audit. Continuity * integrates operational impacts and recovery. Avoid having security be judge and jury on acceptance, security proposes, business decides, internal audit verifies. Process, artifacts that actually work. Documented risk methodology, criteria, scales, minimum evidence. Asset inventory and classification, or processes/services. Risk register with scenario, owner, controls, assessment, treatment, residual, review date. Treatment plan with traceability to risks. SOA as evidence of control selection and justification. Technology, support, not substitute. GRC tool can help with traceability and workflow. But if the tool forces you into probability times impact, without criteria, it pushes you into error. Prioritize ability to model scenarios, controls, evidence, and version criteria. Metrics that prove risk actually went down. The matrix often goes from red to yellow because someone rescored, not because the system changed. To avoid this, you need control effectiveness metrics. Identity and access asterisk. Percent of privileged accounts with MFA. Percent of privileged access with PAM/JIT. Permission recertification completion rate. Vulnerabilities and patches asterisk. Scan coverage on critical assets. Remediation time by criticality. Percent of external exposure with open critical CVEs. Detection and response asterisk. Logging coverage on critical assets. MTTD/MTTR, detection and response times. Response exercises and lessons applied. Resilience asterisk. Restoration success in tests. RTO/RPO achieved in drills. Third parties asterisk. Percent of critical vendors assessed. Critical findings unremediated by vendor. With metrics, residual risk stops being opinion and becomes a claim backed by evidence. Common mistakes you must avoid. Crossmark mistake 1, matrix first, criteria later. Why it happens: there's pressure to show quick results. How to avoid it: invest 2 weeks defining criteria before scoring anything. Crossmark mistake 2, risks without owners. Why it happens: they're assigned to IT or security generically. How to avoid it: each risk must have a business owner who decides acceptance. Crossmark mistake 3, probability based on news headlines. Why it happens: trendy threats get overdimensioned. How to avoid it: assess exposure and control specific to your organization. Crossmark mistake 4, impact without separating CIA. Why it happens: everything's high without distinguishing which dimension it affects. How to avoid it: assess confidentiality, integrity, and availability separately. Crossmark mistake 5, treatment equals buying a tool. Why it happens: controls without scenario model. How to avoid it: map each control to what part of the risk it reduces. Crossmark mistake 6, SOA as paperwork. Why it happens: it's filled out to pass audit. How to avoid it: connect SOA with real risks and justify each inclusion/exclusion. Crossmark mistake 7, only annual review. Why it happens: lack of capacity or budget. How to avoid it: define automatic reevaluation triggers by events. Conclusion: ISO/IEC 27005 doesn't ask for a perfect matrix. It asks for defensible decisions. In summary, we saw that matrices deceive when they become a substitute for method, multiplying ordinal scales as if they were real math and hiding critical context. ISO/IEC 27005 guides the process of risk management to support an ISMS conforming to ISO/IEC 27001, with criteria, scenarios, evidence, and traceability. You can improve without being an expert by adopting scenarios, clear criteria, effectiveness metrics, and continuous review. The real method lives in documented criteria, impact by CIA, decomposed probability, acceptance. Traceable scenarios, asset plus threat plus condition plus consequence. Control evidence, configuration, logs, tests, metrics. Review by criticality and trigger events. If today your matrix looks good, but you can't explain why two red risks are different, or can't prove with metrics that residual risk went down, then the matrix is deceiving you. The good news, you can start changing this in 30 to 60 days without redoing your entire ISMS. You just need the will to move from pretty colors to evidence-backed decisions. And when you do, you won't just pass audits more easily. You'll actually be protecting your organization. Speech balloon. If you found this content valuable, follow and support my work on cybersecurity and technology. Open book. For more in-depth articles with detailed analysis, extended use cases, and additional references, visit www.bvcconsultor.com.